The observation deck fell silent as the massive Taraxian vessel entered Earth's orbit. The ship dwarfed anything humans had ever built, its surface gleaming with a metallic sheen that seemed to shift colors as it moved against the backdrop of stars. Commander Jinho Park stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his posture rigid as he watched the alien delegation prepare to board the International Space Station. "They're here," whispered Science Officer Hanbin Kim, his voice barely audible even in the hushed room. Jinho nodded, but didn't turn his gaze from the viewport. After decades of searching the stars for signs of intelligent life, humanity's first contact wasn't happening as anyone had imagined. The aliens had simply appeared 3 days ago at the edge of the solar system, their ship moving at speeds that defied Earth's understanding of physics. "All department heads, report status," Jinho ordered, his calm voice belying the rapid beating of his heart. "Medical standing by," came the response from Dr. Min Sioba. "Security teams in position," confirmed Security Chief Jai Yun Li. "Translation systems online and functioning," added Communications Officer Du Yun Choi. Jinho took a deep breath. Humanity's future might well depend on what happened in the next few hours. The docking procedure was flawless, the alien vessel connecting to the station with precision that spoke of advanced technology and experience. The airlock cycled, and Jinho fought to keep his expression neutral as the station's main entry doors slid open. The Taraxian delegation stepped through with fluid grace. Their leader stood nearly 7 feet tall, with a slender frame and iridescent skin that seemed to pulse with inner light. 4 arms emerged from a torso covered in what appeared to be a form-fitting metallic suit. The alien's face featured large, multifaceted eyes that reflected the station's lights like gemstones. "I am Delegate Prime of the Taraxian Collective." The alien spoke, its mouth not moving. Instead, a small device at its throat pulsed with each word. "We extend greetings to the species known as human." Jinho stepped forward. "On behalf of Earth and all humanity, I welcome you. I am Commander Jinho Park, appointed representative for this historic meeting." The Taraxian's head tilted slightly. "Your species has achieved much in a relatively short time. This is noteworthy." Something in the alien's tone made Jinho's skin crawl, but he maintained his diplomatic smile. "We are eager to learn about the Taraxian Collective and share knowledge." "Yes," Delegate Prime replied. "Knowledge sharing will be beneficial. Your species has potential." The meeting continued in the station's conference room, where Earth's top scientists and diplomats gathered to meet the visitors. The Taraxians revealed they were part of a vast interstellar alliance comprising over 30 different species, spread across what they called the local cluster of stars. Jinho noticed that while the aliens answered questions readily, they revealed surprisingly little of substance. They spoke of cultural exchange and developmental guidance, but deflected questions about their technology and the locations of other inhabited worlds. In time, Delegate Prime said repeatedly, "All will be shared in time as your species demonstrates readiness." Later that evening, alone in his quarters, Jinho reviewed the recordings of the meeting. Something didn't feel right. The Taraxians' condescension was subtle but unmistakable, as if they were speaking to children. His personal terminal chimed with an encrypted message from Dr. Kyung Hoon Yoon, Earth's leading astrophysicist who had been monitoring the alien vessel. "Commander, I've detected energy signatures that match unexplained phenomena we've been tracking for decades," the message read. "These aliens may have been here before." Jinho frowned, sleep forgotten as he dug deeper into the data Kyung Hoon had sent. The energy patterns matched mysterious signals detected near failed satellite launches and experimental propulsion tests dating back 50 years. The next morning, during the second round of talks, Jinho watched the Taraxians more carefully. When Earth's representative mentioned their recent breakthroughs in quantum computing, he noticed a flicker of what might have been concern pass between the aliens. "Your advances in this area are surprising," Delegate Prime said carefully. We had not anticipated such progress at your current developmental stage. The comment lingered in Jinho's mind throughout the day. That evening, he called an emergency meeting with his most trusted staff in a section of the station swept for surveillance devices. Something's not adding up, he told Hanbin and Jai-yun. They know too much about our technological progress, yet they claim this is first contact. Jai-yun nodded, her eyes narrowed. I've been watching their security team. They move through our station like they've memorized the layout, but we only sent them the schematics yesterday. Hanbin pulled up a datapad. I've been analyzing their ship's position when it appeared in our system. It emerged from behind one of Jupiter's moons, the perfect blind spot to avoid our detection arrays. As if they knew exactly where to hide, Jinho murmured. The pieces were beginning to form a disturbing picture. Jinho authorized a covert scan of Earth's outer solar system using new detection methods the station had been testing. The results came back 3 days later, while the diplomatic talks continued on the main deck. Jinho slipped away to meet Kyung-hoon in the science lab, where the astrophysicist displayed a 3-dimensional map of the solar system with several points highlighted in red. We've found them, Kyung-hoon said quietly. Observation posts, 7 of them, hidden in the Kuiper Belt and asteroid field. Based on the degradation of their outer hulls, some have been there for at least 300 years. Jinho felt the blood drain from his face. They've been watching us. Not just watching, Hanbin added, joining them. I've analyzed the station's energy outputs. They're consistent with long-range interference technology. They could potentially disrupt any experiment or technology they deemed problematic. That night, Jinho called Security Chief Jai-yun to his quarters for an encrypted meeting. The implications were too severe to discuss openly. They've been keeping us contained, Jinho told her, his voice barely above a whisper despite the counter-surveillance measures humming around them. This isn't first contact. This is them deciding we've become too advanced to ignore any longer. Jai-yun's face hardened. The breakthrough in quantum theory last year, it must have triggered something in their protocols. We need to be careful, Jinho warned. If they've been monitoring us for centuries, they clearly have reasons for keeping humanity isolated. We need to learn what those reasons are before we reveal what we know. What's our next move? Jai-yun asked. Jinho looked out his viewport at the massive Tyraxian vessel looming against the stars. For the first time, he saw it not as a symbol of new beginnings, but as a shadow that had been hanging over humanity for centuries. We play their game, he said finally. We continue diplomatic relations, express gratitude for their guidance. Meanwhile, we quietly alert Earth's governments to establish a response plan. The Tyraxians think they're dealing with naive newcomers to the galactic stage. Let's let them keep thinking that while we prepare. As Jinho turned back to face Jai-yun, his expression was resolute. Humanity has been in the dark long enough. It's time we shed some light on our uninvited guardians. 6 months had passed since the Tyraxians arrived. For half a year, Earth's diplomats had sat across from the alien representatives, negotiating terms of what they called mutual partnership. 6 months of smiles, handshakes, and terms that always seemed to change after they were agreed upon. 6 months of promises. Security Chief Jai-yun Lee stared at her datapad, scrolling through the latest exchange documents. Around her, the underground command center hummed with activity as analysts pored over information gathered from the ongoing negotiations. This facility, buried beneath Seoul, had become the true heart of Earth's response to the Tyraxian arrival. "Find anything new?" asked Commander Jinho Park as he entered the room, looking tired. The past months had aged him visibly. "Same story, different day," Jai-yun replied, pushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Look at the pattern." She displayed the information on the main screen for everyone to see. A chart showed all technologies promised by the Tyraxians versus what had actually been delivered. The gap was striking. They promised medical technology that could cure cancer. Jai-yun pointed to one line. What they gave us was a slightly improved imaging system, nothing our scientists wouldn't have developed in 5 years anyway. Jin-Ho nodded grimly. And what did we give them in return? Jai-Yun pulled up another document. Access to rare earth mining sites in protected regions, complete biological samples from 50,000 volunteer humans, DNA, tissue, brain scans, permission to establish 3 more cultural centers that are clearly monitoring stations. They're not sharing technology, Jai-Yun said, sliding the data pad across the table to Dr. Ta Wu Choi, who had just entered the room. They're harvesting us. Ta Wu picked up the pad, his eyes scanning the information quickly. As Earth's foremost xenolinguist, he had been working around the clock to decode the Taraxian language beyond what their translation devices revealed. Their language contains layers, Ta Wu explained, setting down his own materials. What we hear through the translators is just the surface. There are tonal modulations, subharmonics that carry additional meaning. Meanings they don't want us to understand. How close are you to cracking it? Jin-Ho asked. Very, Ta Wu replied with a small smile. In fact, I've made significant progress by analyzing recordings from their ship when they thought our systems were offline. His fingers flew across his console, bringing up waveform patterns that pulsed with complex rhythms. The Taraxians communicate on multiple channels simultaneously. What sounds like a simple greeting to us might contain entire paragraphs of hidden information. Over the next 3 weeks, Ta Wu barely left the facility. He worked with a small team of linguistics experts and AI specialists, teaching computers to detect and translate the hidden layers of Taraxian speech. The breakthrough came at 3:42 a.m. on a Tuesday, when Ta Wu successfully decoded a secure communication between Delegate Prime and the Taraxian mothership. "Wake everyone," he told the night shift operator, his voice urgent despite his exhaustion. Now. An hour later, Earth's secret response team gathered around the conference table. Ta Wu stood at the head, dark circles under his eyes, but with a fire in his expression that no one had seen before. "I've accessed their secure communications," he began without preamble. "What I found confirms our worst fears, and then some." He projected a translated conversation onto the main screen. "Integration proceeding according to schedule. Read one message from Delegate Prime. Subject species shows typical resistance patterns, but nothing beyond Phase 2 parameters. Resource extraction ahead of projections." The response from what appeared to be a superior was even more chilling. "Excellent. Ensure complete neural mapping is prioritized. This species has unusual cognitive features that may be valuable. Accelerate timetable for full integration if possible." The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the implications. "There's more," Ta Wu continued, his voice dropping lower. "I found archives that detail their previous encounters with other intelligent species. It's worse than we thought." New images appeared on screen, alien worlds with species completely unknown to humans. Charts and timelines showed first contact, negotiation periods, and finally what the Taraxians called integration. They'd done this 12 times before, Ta Wu explained to the stunned council, each time following the same pattern. First contact, technological exchanges that seem beneficial but are actually designed to create dependency. Resource agreements that drain the planet while appearing fair. And finally, complete biological and cultural absorption. He pulled up one final document, a timetable with Earth's name at the top. "We're being systematically incorporated as a subordinate race," Ta Wu continued, pointing to the schedule. "Their timetable gives us less than 4 months before complete integration." "What does complete integration mean?" asked Dr. Min Seo-Ba, her voice barely above a whisper. Ta Wu's expression darkened. "Based on what I found, they begin by installing their representatives in all major governments. Then they implement population control measures, sterilization of certain groups, genetic modification of others. Within 2 generations, the subjugated species is fully incorporated into their hierarchy. As a labor class." Jin-Ho stood suddenly, pounding his fist on the table with such force that water glasses jumped. His normally composed face was flushed with anger. "Then we have 4 months to prepare Project Prometheus," he said, referring to the contingency plan they had been developing in secret. "Can we trust this intelligence?" asked one of the military representatives. "Could this be misinformation?" Tao shook his head. "I accessed their central database directly. They don't even encrypt these communications properly because they don't believe we have the capability to understand them." Jia Yun pulled up a map of Earth showing the locations of all known Tyrexian facilities. "They're establishing themselves strategically," she noted. "Each cultural center is positioned near a major military installation or government center." "What about the other species?" Jin Ho asked. "The ones they've already subjugated. What happened to them?" Ta Wu's expression turned grim. "Some were fully absorbed. Others serve as labor forces on mining colonies. A few fought back and were—" He paused, searching for the right word. "Pacified." "Did any successfully resist?" Jia Yun asked. "Not according to their records," Ta Wu replied. "But there's something interesting. The Tyrexians seem particularly interested in human creativity. Multiple reports mention our unusual cognitive patterns and unpredictable problem-solving approaches." Jin Ho's eyes narrowed. "They find us unpredictable." "Yes," Ta Wu nodded. "And that seems to both intrigue and concern them." Jin Ho turned to the assembled team. "Then that's our advantage. We need to be unpredictable in ways they can't anticipate." He activated the secure terminal, bringing up the Project Prometheus files. What had started as a contingency plan was now their only hope. "We accelerate everything," Jin Ho ordered. "While we maintain the facade of negotiations, we prepare our response. We have 4 months to save our species from becoming just another entry in their catalog of conquests." As the meeting broke up into urgent action groups, Jia Yun stayed behind with Jin Ho and Ta Wu. "There's something else, isn't there?" she asked Ta Wu, noticing his troubled expression. The linguist nodded slowly. "In their communications, they refer to Earth as a Category 7 acquisition." "What does that mean?" Jin Ho asked. "It means," Ta Wu said quietly, "that they consider complete replacement an option if integration fails. They'd done it before, on worlds they deemed too resistant." The three stood in silence, the weight of this knowledge settling over them like a shroud. "Then failure isn't an option," Jin Ho finally said. "Project Prometheus must succeed. For all of humanity." Deep beneath the Pacific Ocean, 300 scientists worked day and night in a facility that officially didn't exist. Project Prometheus had transformed from a theoretical exercise into humanity's last hope. The facility had been built years earlier as a deep-sea research station, but now its true purpose was revealed. Here, miles from prying eyes, both human and alien, Earth's brightest minds worked to find a weakness in Tyrexian technology. Dr. Sujin Kang hadn't slept properly in days. Her eyes burned as she stared at the holographic display, watching as the simulation ran through another iteration. Around her, the lab hummed with activity, but she had tuned it all out, focused entirely on the patterns emerging before her. "Dr. Kang." A voice pulled her from her concentration. "The command team has arrived for the briefing." Sujin nodded, rubbing her eyes. "Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes." She saved her work and gathered her notes. This meeting would determine whether Project Prometheus moved forward or back to the drawing board. The weight of this responsibility pressed down on her shoulders as she made her way to the conference room. Commander Jin Ho Park sat at the head of the table, with Security Chief Jia Yun Li beside him. Military leaders from 12 nations filled the remaining seats, their faces grave. They all understood what was at stake. "Dr. Kang," Jin Ho nodded as she entered. "We're eager to hear your findings." Su Jin connected her data pad to the main display. A 3-dimensional model of a Tyrexian brain appeared, rotating slowly in the air above the table. "For the past 3 months, We've been analyzing everything we know about Terraxian biology and psychology, she began. We've studied their language patterns, decision-making processes, and problem-solving approaches. What we've discovered may be the key to our survival. She zoomed in on specific regions of the alien brain. The Terraxians' neural structure is fundamentally different from ours. Their thought processes are entirely hierarchical, moving from point A to point B to point C in a logical linear fashion. Isn't that more efficient? Asked General Wong, skepticism clear in his voice. Efficient, yes, but also predictable, Sujin continued. And it creates a significant blind spot. The Terraxians can't comprehend human intuitive leaps. When humans solve problems, we often jump from point A directly to point Z through intuition or creative thinking. We connect seemingly unrelated concepts in ways the Terraxians literally cannot understand. She displayed records of Terraxian reactions to human innovations over the past 6 months. Look at their response when we showed them our art, our music, even our mathematics. They were confused by how we reach certain conclusions without following their established steps. That's why they feared our development, Jin-Ho said, understanding immediately. We're unpredictable to them. Su-Jin nodded. Exactly. Their entire species evolved with this linear thinking pattern. It's not just a cultural difference, it's biological. They cannot conceive of solutions that don't follow their established pathways. She changed the display to show a piece of Terraxian technology, a small disc-shaped device with an intricate pattern on its surface. This is a component from their shield generator that they allowed us to examine as part of the knowledge exchange. They assumed we would study it for decades without understanding its principles. Su-Jin smiled for the first time. We decoded it in 2 weeks, because we approached it from angles they never considered. The room stirred with excitement as Su-Jin continued. Their technology is advanced, but it's built on predictable patterns. Once we identified these patterns, we found we could not only understand their systems, but improve upon them in ways they hadn't imagined. Show them, Jin-Ho instructed, leaning forward. Su-Jin brought up footage from a test chamber. A replica of a Terraxian communication device sat on a platform. Nearby, a small black box hummed quietly. When activated, the black box emitted a pulse of energy that wasn't visible to the naked eye, but the effects were immediate. The Terraxian device went dark. This is what we call the Dark Star Protocol, Su-Jin explained. It exploits a fundamental flaw in Terraxian quantum communication technology. A flaw they don't know exists because their linear thinking never led them to test for it. Will it work against all their systems? Jia-Yun asked, her eyes fixed on the demonstration. We believe so, Su-Jin replied. We've tested it against every piece of Terraxian technology we've been able to acquire or replicate. In each case, the results were the same. Will the Dark Star Protocol work on their actual systems? Jia-Yun pressed. Not just our replicas. It already has in tests, Su-Jin replied with quiet confidence. We managed to target one of their remote monitoring stations in the Kuiper Belt last week. One activation disabled their communication systems completely. They still don't know what happened. They assume it was a hardware failure. Jin-Ho's face hardened. Then we have our advantage. There's more, Su-Jin continued. While studying their biology, we discovered something else interesting about the Terraxians. She displayed a new set of images, cellular structures that pulsed with a faint light. Their bodies contain photosensitive cells throughout their nervous system. These cells help them communicate with each other and with their technology. But this creates another vulnerability. Su-Jin pulled up a simulation showing the Terraxian exposed to a specific frequency of light. This light pattern disrupts their neural pathways temporarily. Not harmful, but completely disorienting to them. It's like an instant migraine that passes after a few minutes. To us, it's just a bright flash. You're saying we can incapacitate them without violence? General Novak asked, sounding impressed. For short periods, yes, Su-Jin confirmed. long enough to gain tactical advantage if necessary. Jin-Ho turned to the assembled leaders. This gives us options we didn't have before. We can disable their technology and temporarily incapacitate their personnel without causing permanent harm. What about their ships? Asked Admiral Chen. Their weapon systems. Su Jin displayed a new diagram. Their ships use the same quantum communication principles for internal systems coordination. Dark Star should affect them as well, though we haven't been able to test this directly yet. How soon can we deploy these technologies on a large scale? Jin-Ho asked. The Dark Star devices can be mass-produced within 3 weeks, Su Jin replied. We've already begun manufacturing components. The neural disruptors require more precise calibration, but should be ready in similar timeframes. Jin-Ho stood, addressing the entire room. Then we move forward, while our diplomatic team continues to negotiate. Buying us time, we prepare our response. If the Tyraxians intend to subjugate humanity, they'll find we're not as easily controlled as they thought. As the meeting continued, detailing deployment strategies and coordination plans, Su Jin felt a weight lift from her shoulders. For months, the future had seemed hopeless. How could humanity possibly stand against a species with technology centuries beyond their own? Now, they had a fighting chance. Later, as the military leaders departed to implement the new plans, Jin-Ho approached Su Jin privately. Your team has accomplished the impossible, he said quietly. You've given us hope. Su Jin shook her head. We just followed the evidence. The Tyraxians are advanced, but they're not infallible. Their greatest strength, their logical, hierarchical thinking, is also their greatest weakness. What I don't understand, Jia said, joining them, is why they would allow a species like ours to develop at all, if they knew we posed this kind of threat. Arrogance, Su Jin replied simply. They don't view us as a threat because they can't imagine we could think in ways they cannot. To them, we're just another species to be guided, controlled, and eventually absorbed. Jin-Ho's expression hardened. Then they've made a critical error in judgment. As they walked through the facility together, observing the teams working on various aspects of Project Prometheus, Jin-Ho's communicator chimed. A message from Earth's diplomatic team on the surface. The Tyraxians are accelerating their timetable, he read aloud, his voice grim. They're requesting immediate implementation of Phase 3 integration protocols. They must suspect something, Jia said. Jin-Ho nodded. We may have less time than we thought. Dr. Kang, how quickly can you have the first batch of Dark Star devices ready for deployment? Su Jin calculated quickly. If we divert all resources and work around the clock, 10 days at minimum. Make it 7, Jin-Ho said, his expression leaving no room for debate. In 1 week, we need to be ready to move. Su Jin nodded, already mentally reorganizing production schedules. 7 days. As she returned to her lab, Su Jin thought about the irony of the situation. The Tyraxians had come to Earth expecting to find another species to control, to add to their collection. Instead, they had encountered something they couldn't predict or understand: human ingenuity and determination. In 7 days, they would learn exactly what that meant. The United Nations Hall of Unity glittered with cameras and diplomats from every nation. This meeting with the Tyraxian delegation had been announced as a formality, the final session before Earth officially joined the collective as a protected species. The mood was tense but resigned. After 9 months of negotiations, most Earth governments had accepted the inevitable. Most, but not all. Commander Jin-Ho Park adjusted his uniform as he took his seat at the center of the human delegation. Beside him sat Jia Li, her expression carefully neutral despite the weight of what they were about to do. Across from them, the Tyraxian representatives arranged themselves in their customary formation, with Delegate Prime at the center. Jin-Ho's earpiece crackled softly. Dark Star devices in position, came Dr. Su Jin Kang's voice. All teams standing by. Jin-Ho tapped his finger once on the table to acknowledge. careful not to show any reaction. The tiny signal device implanted in his palm felt warm against his skin. 9 months of planning, of working in secret while maintaining the illusion of compliance, had led to this moment. The terms are generous. Delegate Prime began without preamble, its voice translated smoothly by the devices on the table. The collective will ensure Earth's protection, guide your technological development, and introduce you to galactic society at an appropriate pace. The alien's multifaceted eyes scanned the human delegation. Your species has much to learn before you can be trusted with unrestricted access to advanced technology. Jinho noticed how the condescension in the Taraxians' tone had grown more obvious in recent weeks. They no longer bothered hiding their true intentions. We have reviewed your latest requests for amendments. Delegate Prime continued, a note of irritation entering its voice. Your continued attempts to delay integration protocols are unacceptable. The collective has determined Earth will transition to protected status immediately. Several human diplomats shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The Taraxian was no longer asking for agreement, it was issuing commands. Jinho took a deep breath and stood slowly, aware that this moment would change human history forever. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to him. Humanity has a response to your demands, he said calmly. We have listened, we have learned, and we have decided. He paused, looking directly into the Taraxian's eyes. This is our final warning. Earth abandons the negotiating table. Murmurs erupted around the room. This wasn't the planned response. The Taraxian delegates leaned toward each other, communicating in their complex language. You misunderstand the situation, Delegate Prime replied, its voice colder. This is not a negotiation. The decision has been made. Earth will be integrated into the collective for its own protection. Jinho remained standing, unflinching. No, we understand the situation perfectly. We know what you've done to 12 other species before us. We know about your observation posts that have been monitoring Earth for centuries. We know everything. The confusion on the delegate's face turned to alarm. How did you? We decoded your language, Jinho continued, his voice growing stronger. We accessed your secure communications. We know that integration means subjugation, and we reject it completely. The Taraxian leader rose to its full height, towering over Jinho. This defiance is pointless. You have no leverage. The collective's technology is centuries beyond your own. Is it? Jinho asked, a small smile forming at the corner of his mouth. We will not surrender our autonomy. We will not become another subjugated world. Jinho spread his fingers on the table, pressing his palm flat against the surface. The signal device in his palm activated, sending a coded message to command centers around the world. Project Prometheus is now active, he announced, loudly enough for everyone to hear. Throughout the solar system, on Earth, and in space, thousands of dark star devices activated simultaneously. The pulse was invisible to human eyes, but its effects were immediate and dramatic. The Taraxian delegates stiffened as their communication devices went dark. The lights on their ceremonial armor flickered and died. Around the hall, screens displaying the Taraxian ships in orbit suddenly showed the vessels drifting, their lights fading. What have you done? Delegate Prime demanded, genuine fear now evident in its voice. Changed the rules, Jinho replied. Across the table, the secondary Taraxian delegate collapsed, its neural systems overwhelmed by the targeted frequencies now pulsing through the room's lighting system, invisible to humans, but debilitating to Taraxian biology. Jinho turned to address the shocked human representatives. For 9 months, we've pretended to negotiate while preparing our response. The Taraxians have been monitoring and interfering with human development for centuries, preventing us from advancing too quickly. They've done this to a dozen other species, all of whom now serve as subordinate races in their collective. He gestured to the struggling aliens. This was never about partnership. It was about conquest. Slow, patient conquest disguised as protection. The UN Secretary-General stepped forward. "Commander Park, what exactly have you done?" "We've deployed the Dark Star Protocol," Jin Ho explained. "It exploits a fundamental flaw in Taraxian technology, a flaw they never discovered because their thinking is too linear, too predictable. Every Taraxian system in our solar system has been disabled. Their ships are powerless. Their weapons are useless. On cue, the main screen activated, showing feeds from around the world and in orbit. Taraxian vessels hung motionless in space. Their bases on Earth's surface were dark, surrounded by human military forces that had been positioned days earlier. "How is this possible?" the French ambassador asked, staring at the images in disbelief. Jia Yun stood to answer. "The Taraxians underestimated us. They thought we would follow the same pattern as other species they've subjugated. But human creativity, our ability to make intuitive leaps, to connect seemingly unrelated concepts, gave us an advantage they couldn't anticipate." Delegate Prime had regained some composure, though it still swayed slightly. "This action will not go unanswered. The collective will respond with force." "No," Jin Ho replied firmly. "They won't. Because right now, human ships are approaching every Taraxian observation post in our system. We know their locations, we know how to disable them, and we know exactly how to communicate with the collective." He turned back to the screen as it showed Earth vessels surrounding the alien outposts. "As we speak, a message is being transmitted to your leadership using your own communication protocols. The message is simple. Earth is off limits. Any attempt to reestablish control will result in us sharing our Dark Star technology with other species you've subjugated." The blood drained from Delegate Prime's face, making its iridescent skin pale. "You wouldn't dare." "We already have," Jin Ho confirmed. "The specifications for Dark Star devices have been encoded and hidden throughout the galaxy. If anything happens to Earth, the information will be automatically released to every world in the collective." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. What Jin Ho was describing wasn't just resistance, it was leverage. "You have 1 hour to order all Taraxian forces to withdraw from our solar system," Jin Ho continued. "After that, we will begin dismantling your observation posts one by one." Delegate Prime seemed to crumple slightly. "This is unprecedented. No species has ever understood what you were doing until it was too late," Jin Ho interrupted. "We did." He stepped closer to the alien, lowering his voice. "We know you find humans unpredictable and unsettling. Good. Remember that feeling. Remember what happened today when you thought about interfering with another world." The next hour passed in tense silence. Human military leaders coordinated with teams around the world, while the Taraxian delegates huddled together, communicating through backup systems that functioned at a fraction of their normal capacity. Finally, Delegate Prime approached Jin Ho. "The withdrawal has been ordered. All Taraxian forces will leave Earth space within 24 hours. "We will verify this," Jin Ho replied, not bothering to hide his satisfaction. As the Taraxians prepared to depart, Delegate Prime turned back. "The collective will not forget this humiliation." Jin Ho's expression hardened. "Good, because humanity will not forget your attempted subjugation. The next time we meet, it will be as equals, or not at all." After the aliens had left, the human representatives gathered around Jin Ho and Jia Yun, their expressions a mix of shock, relief, and uncertainty. "What happens now?" the Secretary-General asked. Jin Ho looked at the screen showing Taraxian ships already beginning to pull away from Earth orbit. "Now," he said, "humanity takes its rightful place among the stars, not as a protected species, not as servants, but as free people determining our own destiny. For the first time in centuries, perhaps for the first time ever, humans had control of their own future among the stars." 3 months after the warning, as it came to be known, Jin Ho stood on the bridge of the Earth vessel Defiance. The ship represented the best of human ingenuity, Built in record time using a combination of Earth technology and reverse-engineered Tyraxian systems, its sleek, dark hull cut through space with a grace that belied its power. Through the main view screen, Jin-Ho watched as they approached the world of Maris Prime. The planet glowed blue-green against the darkness, clouds swirling across its surface. According to their intelligence, this was the 12th world the Tyraxians had subjugated, home to a species called the Kyun. "Entering standard orbit," announced the pilot, her hands moving confidently across the controls. Jin-Ho nodded. "Status report." Navigation Officer Young Mai-Ryu looked up from her station. Scans show Tyraxian control facilities in the 3 major cities. The Kyun species are emerging from their habitation centers. They're celebrating in the streets. Jin-Ho moved closer to the screen, observing the data feeds showing crowds gathering in the planet's capital. The Kyun were tall, slender beings with pale blue skin and 4 arms. Their movements seemed almost dance-like as they poured from their homes. "They've heard the news," Jai-Yun said, coming to stand beside Jin-Ho. "Word travels fast, even with the Tyraxians trying to control all communications." "And the Tyraxian authorities?" asked Jin-Ho. "Withdrawing to their ships," Jai-Yun confirmed, pointing to several red indicators on the tactical display. "This is the 3rd successful liberation." Jin-Ho allowed himself a small smile. When they had first developed the Dark Star Protocol, he had hoped it would save Earth. He never imagined it would become a tool to free an entire sector of the galaxy. After repelling the Tyraxians from Earth, humanity had made a difficult decision. They could have simply defended their world and left the rest of the galaxy to its fate. Instead, they chose to share their knowledge with other subjugated species. "The Kyun leadership is requesting permission to come aboard," Communications Officer Du-Yun Choi reported. "They wish to formally join the alliance." Jin-Ho straightened his uniform. "Grant permission. Prepare the conference room." An hour later, Jin-Ho sat across from the Kyun High Speaker, a dignified individual whose skin shimmered with age markings. Through the universal translator, a much-improved version of the device the Tyraxians had used, Jin-Ho could hear the emotion in the alien's voice. "For 200 years, my people have lived under Tyraxian rule," the High Speaker said. 200 years of being told we were not ready for full galactic citizenship. 200 years of watching our resources stripped away while we received only the most basic technologies in return. The speaker's 4 hands formed a traditional gesture of respect. Then humans came with the Dark Star. In one day, our oppressors lost their power. We still cannot fully comprehend how you achieved this. Jin-Ho nodded respectfully. The Tyraxians believed their way of thinking was superior to all others. Their arrogance became their weakness. "The Free Species Alliance welcomes the Kyun," Jin-Ho continued formally. "Earth pledges to share all Dark Star technology and to stand with your people if the collective attempts to reassert control." After the meeting, Jin-Ho returned to the bridge, where Tai Wu was analyzing new data. "The pattern is holding," the xenolinguist reported. "With each world that joins the alliance, 2 or 3 more reach out to us." The Tyraxians kept these species isolated from each other, but now they're communicating directly for the first time. "How many now?" Jin-Ho asked. 7 former collective races have joined Earth in coalition, Ta Wu replied. "With the Kyun, that makes 8, and at least 5 more have sent representatives requesting meetings." Jai-Yun brought up a star map showing the rapidly expanding territory of the Alliance in blue, with Tyraxian space marked in red. "The collective is still vastly larger than our alliance, but their influence is shrinking daily." "Any military response?" Jin-Ho asked, the question that was always on his mind. "None so far," Jai-Yun confirmed. "They've pulled back to their core systems. It seems our threat to release Dark Star specifications to all subjugated worlds is working as a deterrent." Jin-Ho knew this balance wouldn't last forever. Eventually, the Tyraxians would develop countermeasures to Dark Star. But by then, he hoped, the Alliance would be strong enough to stand on its own. Incoming transmission, Du Yun announced suddenly, his voice betraying his surprise. It's from the Tyraxian High Council itself. The bridge fell silent. This was unprecedented. Since Earth's rebellion, all communication had been through lower diplomatic channels. Put it through, Jin Ho ordered, straightening his posture. The view screen changed to show an elderly Tyraxian wearing elaborately decorated robes. Behind it stood what appeared to be the full High Council, the ruling body of the entire collective. I am Supreme Counselor Valneth. The Tyraxian began without preamble. I speak for the collective. Jin Ho inclined his head slightly. Commander Jin Ho Park, representing Earth and the Free Species Alliance. The Supreme Counselor seemed to study Jin Ho for a moment before continuing. The current situation is unsustainable. Your alliance continues to grow. Worlds that have been part of the collective for centuries are now questioning their place. Perhaps they should have been allowed to question earlier, Jin Ho replied calmly. The Tyraxian's skin rippled, a sign of emotional response. What you call subjugation, we call protection. The galaxy is dangerous. Species without guidance often destroy themselves. Or perhaps they simply find their own path. Jin Ho countered. Different from yours, but no less valid. The Supreme Counselor made a gesture that the translator identified as reluctant agreement. This philosophical debate could continue indefinitely. However, practical matters must be addressed. The High Council is requesting negotiations. Tu Wu glanced up sharply from his station, clearly checking to ensure the translation was accurate. He nodded to Jin Ho, confirming the unprecedented nature of this request. On equal terms this time, Jin Ho said with a slight smile. Equal terms, the Supreme Counselor agreed, though the word seemed difficult for the alien to pronounce. After arranging a formal meeting to take place on neutral territory in 2 weeks, the transmission ended. The bridge crew looked at each other in amazement. They're actually willing to negotiate, Young Mai said, breaking the silence. I never thought I'd see the day. Don't celebrate yet, Jai Yun cautioned. This could be a delaying tactic while they develop countermeasures to Darkstar. Possibly, Jin Ho agreed. But I don't think so. The Supreme Counselor showed something I've never seen in a Tyraxian before. What's that? Asked Ta Wu. Doubt, Jin Ho replied. For the first time, they're questioning their own assumptions about how the galaxy should be ordered. Later that evening, Jin Ho stood alone in the observation lounge, looking out at the stars. So much had changed in less than a year. Earth had gone from a single planet, isolated in the cosmos, to the center of a growing alliance that was reshaping galactic politics. The door slid open behind him, and Jai Yun entered. The Kion have officially joined the alliance, she reported. Their scientists are already working with Dr. Kang on improving the Darkstar technology. Jin Ho nodded but remained looking at the stars. What are you thinking about? Jai Yun asked, coming to stand beside him. About choices, he replied after a moment. When we discovered what the Tyraxians were planning, we could have simply defended Earth and left the rest of these species to their fate. That was never really an option for you, Jai Yun said with certainty. Jin Ho smiled slightly. No, I suppose not. They stood in comfortable silence, watching as Maris Prime rotated slowly below them, its cities now bright with lights that had been dimmed under Tyraxian rule. Do you think they can change? Jai Yun asked eventually. The Tyraxians, I mean. Their entire civilization is built on the idea of hierarchy and control. I don't know, Jin Ho admitted. But they're facing something they've never encountered before. Species who think differently coming together as equals rather than in a hierarchy. That alone is revolutionary to them. The ship's communication system chimed softly. Commander, we're receiving requests from 3 more worlds seeking to join the alliance. Du Yun's voice reported. Acknowledge receipt, Jin Ho replied. We'll meet with them all. As the stars continued their eternal dance through the viewport, Jin Ho felt a profound sense of possibility. Humanity had not only saved itself, but had become a catalyst for change throughout this sector of the galaxy. They had shown that determination and creativity could overcome even the most advanced technology. "We should get some rest," Jia Yun suggested. "Tomorrow will be another busy day." Jinho nodded, taking one last look at the stars. Stars that now seemed full of promise rather than threat. "The galaxy is changing," he said quietly. "And we helped change it." As they left the observation lounge, the view screen showed a small Kyun child looking up at the Earth vessel, hovering protectively above their world. The child raised all 4 arms in a gesture of gratitude and hope. Humanity had taken its place among the stars, not as servants, but as defenders of freedom in a galaxy that was learning that determination could overcome even the greatest technological advantages. And the stars, uncountable and eternal, shone on worlds that were free for the first time in centuries.